I'm starting to sound like a broken record, but Purdue is back in another big spot. This is probably the fourth straight game that pregame we would consider it to be a massive spot at Iowa. Ended up being a little bit of a runaway victory, but fourth game in a stretch of five that we really thought were going to be very tough and define this Purdue team season. And it comes after a tough loss in Mackey Arena to Michigan on Tuesday night. But Purdue takes on Indiana in Mackey Arena tomorrow night. We're recording on Thursday, so of course, as you guys might be listening to this, it may be Friday. But yeah, I'm here with Ethan, and this is a Purdue team that lost this matchup earlier in the year. Purdue went to Indiana, lost by 5, 72-67 in Assembly Hall. That was kind of the Nick Dorn game. He was the Ken Palm MVP for Indiana. Had not played a ton before, but went 4 for 9 from three. Really hurt Purdue. Braden Smith had a little bit of a rough game, and the Purdue front court did not show up on the glass a little bit. But Ethan, what are your thoughts on this matchup? How do you think Purdue can kind of change the outcome from the first matchup?
You mentioned the glass. I think that's really where this matchup starts and ends, at least for me. Purdue out rebounded Indiana by 5 in that game. Um, that margin should have been a lot bigger. At least Purdue is capable of making that margin a lot bigger. We talked about this in the preview for the first IU game, but Indiana is not a particularly imposing front court. Tucker DeVries is a very good forward, but he's more perimeter oriented on offense. And Indiana doesn't really play a center that's a plus rebounder, right? Sam Alexis has been coming on recently. I'm a big Sam Alexis guy dating back to his time at Florida last year before he got hurt. But, he plays a lot of the starting center minutes for Indiana. He averages 5 rebounds a game. Like, this should be an opportunity for Oscar Clough, Trey Coffin-Renn, and even Daniel Jacobson and Jack Bender to really establish themselves on the glass and make that an emphasis. And in the first game, Trey Coffin-Renn had his best output of the season up to that point. 23 points on 14 shots. He was excellent and very efficient from the floor, but only had 3 rebounds. Clough had 6, and he tied with Jack Bender for the Purdue lead. This game in Mackey Arena, coming off a tough loss to a Michigan team that really imposed their will physically on Purdue on the glass, even if the rebounding margin wasn't as great as it maybe could have been. I look for them to get back on track on the boards and establish some physicality down low.
Yeah, I think that's the most clear spot this Purdue team can improve. I think in part it was um, largely because the Purdue defensive scheme in that little 3-game stretch that they were playing Illinois, UCLA, and Indiana, and they lost those 3 games, was a little bit different. And I think the rebounding is certainly upticked, even in a Michigan game where you got out rebounded. I think if you got the same effort from the Michigan game in this Indiana game, you end up out rebounding Indiana by like 12, 13. And so I think this Purdue team was in a funk that first time. And maybe if there's nothing schematically, it's an intensity thing that needs to change. And ideally, you also hope that playing in Mackey will help that.
Yeah. I mean, if you think back to the way the first game played out, Indiana really out executed Purdue and out hustled Purdue for most of that game. And then Purdue kind of mounted a furious comeback in the last 10 minutes as Indiana was just melting down, but ultimately still missed too many shots to really take advantage of the fact that Tucker DeVries missed a pair of front ends and they just went super cold from the field late in the game. At the time, we said that was a big spot coming off a home loss to an Illinois team. And now Purdue gets Indiana again, coming off a home loss to a Michigan team that beat Purdue very similarly to how Illinois did. Now, the scoring looked a little bit different. It was a much more balanced effort from Michigan, whereas Illinois' Keaton Wagler just sort of took over the game by himself. But Michigan, like Illinois, was bigger than Purdue. They were more physical than Purdue on the glass. They pressured the ball on defense and kind of took Purdue made Purdue a little bit more uncomfortable running their sets and forced more ISO ball than Purdue's used to running. Purdue's offense still performed decently well in both games, and their defense got cooked. And just like the Illinois game, coming off the Michigan game, Purdue gets an Indiana team. In theory, they should match up very well against. And in the first game, they didn't actually execute the way they could have. And we got on the recap for that game. We're very frustrated with Purdue's effort. Like, coming off of 2 straight losses, including a home loss in a rivalry game, and just looking lackadaisical was frankly unacceptable. Now they're in a similar spot. It's just a 1-game losing streak, not multiple. but Purdue is going to be at home for this game in a rivalry game. If they lose this game, the senior class of Braden Smith, Trick Hoffman, and Fletcher Lawyer will be under 500 against Indiana in their careers. Like, there's a lot legacy-wise riding on this game as well.
Yeah, I agree. It's a great point. And I think we can kind of look back at this game a little bit. And, this is, I want to push back, I think, somewhat on the matchup aspect. I do think personnel wise, this is theoretically a pretty good matchup for Purdue. But, schematically wise, this is an Indiana team that wants to turn it into a kind of mathematical equation. And they want to take a ton of threes. And they have a lot of guys that can make them. This is a Purdue defense that, even when they are operating at their best and executing well, teams still take a high rate of threes. That Purdue wants to force threes, and there's always that threat that this Indiana team, who has quite a bit of size on the wings, which has been another kind of key matchup that I think Purdue has struggled with, is they have a lot of size on the wings. They go 6'6", 6'7", 6'8" at the 2, 3, 4, and all three of those guys are plus shooters, and Dorn, DeVries, and Wilkerson, and that's a tough matchup for this Purdue team.
That much is true. Now, the reason Purdue tends to give up a lot of threes is because they struggle defending the paint. It's sort of a Matt Painter. You mentioned the math problem that Indiana wants to run. Matt Painter wants to do a similar math problem, which is that he knows that if he leaves his guys one-on-one, they're going to get shredded inside the arc. So he says, you know what? We'll double in the post. We'll crowd them out of the paint. We'll throw extra bodies their way when they get inside, and force kickouts to role players that we're going to hope aren't going to be as efficient as their sort of leading three-point shooters. And when Purdue's defense plays well, that's exactly how they execute. They funnel a lot of shots to guys who don't make them. That could be somewhat of a fluky game-to-game variance. Just look at Purdue against Iowa for a good example of how that looks when role players are making shots versus not. But against Indiana, they might not necessarily have to do that. Now, Indiana is a very good ball movement team. They have a pretty high assist rate. They pass the ball well. They cut well off ball. And Purdue got cooked in some of those off-ball actions in the first matchup in Bloomington. But in theory, they don't have a ton of guys who apply a lot of pressure at the rim. Outside of Wilkerson, who can really get downhill if teams are guarding him closely at the three-point line, most of their players prefer to sit back and bomb away from three, and that's what their head coach, that's what DeVries wants as well. So in theory, if Purdue's playing this a little bit more straight up, man-to-man, fight over screen, stay connected to your guy, they can eliminate some of Indiana's three-point volume. The downside, though, is that if Indiana starts attacking the rim, even as a team that doesn't do a ton of that, they could have success.
Yeah, I think we just going back to the initial conversation, the biggest thing this Purdue team needs to change that I think will lead to success is the rebounding. And I think that's the single biggest thing that's easy to change, because I do think the three-point defense wasn't particularly bad in the first matchup. I mean, Indiana shot a lot of them. They didn't shoot, and they didn't make an abnormal amount. They went 12 for 33. That's 36%. That's about what they shoot typically. So I think if you give them 33 threes, they'll probably hit close to 12 of them, and that might put Purdue in a tough spot. But at the end of the day, I think if Purdue dominates on the glass the way they can, you see a little bit of a different kind of result in this game. And something to mention too is Purdue didn't have a super efficient game themselves. They only scored 1.09 points per possession. That's pretty iffy for I think what we would all consider to be, what's analytically the second best offense in the sport, according to KenPom. It's an elite offense, and they really, really struggled to score the ball efficiently. In large part, that was because they had 13 assists to 10 turnovers, and taking care of the ball is the final point I think Purdue can do a little bit better at. This was probably one of Braden's worst games on the year. He ended up with 14 points, but it was on 14 shots. He was 2 for 8 from 3, had 5 rebounds and 5 assists, but 4 turnovers. If he takes care of the ball better, and I think, with that, the rest of the team takes care of the ball a little better, I think this Purdue team can be very efficient against this Indiana team and, have some success. But on that note, I do think that leads us into predictions just a little bit. KenPom currently has this game as a 11-point Purdue win, 80-69, a 65 possession game. I think Purdue covers that number, and with that, I would like a bold prediction player specific wise.
Player specific bold prediction. So 11-point game. I will take Purdue to cover that, but barely. I'll say Purdue wins by like 12 or 13 points. This Indiana team is pretty good, all things considered. Their, NCAA tournament resume is currently anchored by that win over Purdue, but they also have some wins over other tournament teams in Wisconsin, UCLA. Guess it's just Wisconsin and UCLA, but they have a couple tournament level wins on their resume. They're a pretty good shooting team. I think, this will be another test for Purdue's defense of being able to guard well off ball. Wilkerson went 2 for 9 from 3 in that first matchup. I thought CJ Cox did a pretty good job of running him off the 3-point line, but he was very efficient inside the arc. Really, when he got downhill, he got what he wanted. And Connor Enright didn't come off the floor in that game, played 40 minutes and had 8 assists. He really got 2 feet in the paint and spread out the shooters whenever he wanted to. So I want to see Purdue's defense stay in front of their man a little bit more. I'd like to see this be, after a stretch of 4 games where Purdue's defense really played quite well, had an abysmal showing against Michigan, top 5 offense in the sport, that'll happen. But, if Purdue wants to make a Final Four run, if they want to be in contention for national title, like they all believe they can be, they got to get better defensively. That's really where they have to improve, is defensively, and then show up on the glass in the biggest games. And this is a chance for Purdue to do both of those things. So I'll take Purdue like 83 to 71 in this game, maybe a slightly higher possession game than KenPom is projecting. As for player specific, I think Trey Kaufman-Renn keeps his hot streak going. You guys stop giving me the first player predictions, man. We're on the same page with all of these.
Yeah.
Last time we did player specific predictions, we both had Omer Meyer going for 20 against Oregon. So maybe it ended up being better for you that you had to pivot, because I think you got yours right.
Yeah, I ended up going Trey Kaufman-Renn. I said, I think I said 10, 10, and 5 or something like that. And he had
said triple double watch, and he ended up with like 12,
8
9,
and
and
7
6
or something like that. Yeah.
I'm sticking with Trey Kaufman-Renn though. He was go check out our Michigan recap, which is up on the channel now for a more in-depth discussion on Trey's recent performances. But he's been on fire lately. The rebounding has really picked up during this winning streak, and even in the Michigan game, he led all rebounders with 12 against Michigan's vaunted front court. So I'll say I don't think he gets to 27 again, mostly because I don't think Purdue will need him to. I think the rest of their offense will be working better than it did against Michigan, and he won't get 26 shots. But I'll think it's close to 20. Give me like 18 and 11 for Trey in like 29 minutes. A couple assists thrown in there as well. I think he doesn't quite get to 30 minutes, and we'll be on the recap and saying like he could have had 25 and 15 if he played him 35 minutes. But yeah, that's my bold prediction. Where are you going to pivot now? Where are you going for the bold prediction?
Oh, I've got one for you. First, I'm gonna focus on the game first, though. I tend to agree with you on game flow. I think this Purdue team wins comfortably, but not going away, if that makes sense. I think they're able to keep Indiana at arm's reach for a lot of this game. I think you might see a run early in this game that gets Purdue up to like an 8 or 9 point lead. And if that happens, I think this Purdue team holds strong there. Player specific wise, though, I'm going to go pretty crazy here. I think this is a Daniel Jacobson game. Maybe Daniel Jacobson get back on Reed Bailey. I think you're starting to see some better things from Daniel Jacobson. I'm going to go DJ has a 10.5 rebound, 5 block game against a undersized Indiana front court that I think got the better of him at the rim defensively last game. Reed Bailey went through him a couple times. I think DJ gets his get back at the rim. He had 5 boards in the last Indiana matchup for what it's worth, and I also think that Purdue is able to keep this a comfortable enough lead that you see about 20 DJ minutes, and he's able to be on the receiving end of a couple of Braden Smith lobs for some pretty easy points there.
I like that. I will never be able to get the image out of my head of Reed Bailey driving through Daniel Jacobson's chest, literally stumbling through it and half throwing up a shot where they both nearly almost fell over. It was baby deer on baby deer in the first matchup. I don't think I've ever seen a better play look worse from a center Like Reed Bailey drove through the chest of one of the best shot blockers in the Big Ten, and it looked like he maybe shouldn't be out there on the floor while he did it. So if this is a big Daniel Jacobson game, uh, I'll piggyback a prediction off of yours there. If he gets to 10, 5, and 5, he's gonna have a similarly embarrassing play that turns out really well for him. Like I'm talking like ball goes through his hands in the alley oop and he just tips it and it bounces off the backboard and through the bucket, or like a block that like he swats and it bounces off of Reed Bailey's head and smashes him in the nose and he's like bleeding and he's got to go to the sideline or something like that. If he gets 10, 10, and 5, or he gets 10, 5, and 5, it's not going to be pretty.
Somebody's going to nutmeg him. He's going to recover, get a block, and Indiana going to get an offensive rebound, second Daniel Jacobson block. But you won't forget when he got nutmegged and almost fell over.
Give me 3 blocks on 1 possessions that still ends up in him getting driven through for a layup.
That would be probably about plus 150 if you could find that at a book. So would be a fun side bet. But on that note, thanks for listening, everyone. Go Boilers. Hopefully we see a big rivalry win tomorrow night.